Hey folks, I'm Chuck Black. We're doing 52 weeks of Python in 10-minute sessions. The topic for today is nested data. What is nested data? It's basically something like you see here where there are dictionaries inside dictionaries inside dictionaries inside lists, etc., etc., etc. How do you create them? Pretty much basically like you do before, but you're just using a data structure as the value in this situation with my dictionary. How do you actually process them? Well, you can process them with nested for loops, such as you see right here. How do you reference specific items? You can reference specific items just by using the keys in a format that looks something like this. Here's a dictionary key, dictionary key, dictionary key, list subscript, dictionary key, something like that. So that is what we will be talking about. It can be intimidating at first, but it's really pretty straightforward. So let's get started. Okay, so nested data, what am I talking about? Well, rather than show you the code first, I think what I'll do is I will run this and then you can look at the data that gets printed out. Now notice as I'm scrolling up here, you see things that are indented a lot. That's because I'm doing a pretty print, and pretty print is going to be showing all of the dictionaries of dictionaries of dictionaries of lists of dictionaries of lists of dictionaries, as you can see in that situation. If we go to the very top, you can see that I'm going to start with something really simple, which is my normal device. But look, one of my items in this dictionary is going to actually have a list inside it. And this is an example of me printing that out after I have added some data to it. Here's a pretty print of the same thing. So this right here is my device dictionary, but you notice, and this is in kind of a random order in terms of what order they print the keys in, but the key for interfaces actually is, and you can see this because of the square brackets there, it's actually a list. And the list itself contains dictionaries, which include name of the interface and the speed of the interface. So you can see there are multiple things in this list, and each one of these things is a dictionary, and that list itself is part of a dictionary. So you see a lot of nesting going on here. That's what we're talking about. And now we'll look at how you do that with Python. So how do you deal with nested data in Python? Well, the answer is no differently than you deal with anything else. So here, device is a dictionary. I can see that. Now I'm adding an extra key with data, which is actually a list. You can see that by the square brackets, and there's nothing in this right now, so it's an empty list. But that is my first instance of nested data, where I have a dictionary and inside it I have a list. Here I print it out, no big deal there. Now I'm going to go through and I'm actually going to add interfaces to that particular interfaces key that I have in my dictionary. Now what I'm doing in this situation is I'm going through and I'm doing a for loop, and I'm deciding that I'm going to do a range of 0 to 8, 0 to 7 actually, and my interface is going to have a speed which I am going to arbitrarily have randomly chosen, and my interface name is going to be G00 and then whatever the index number is. And then at the end of the day, my interfaces is going to have that data in it. And if I scroll back up to the top, then you can see here are my interfaces that have been created. So how do you add data to a nested data structure? Well, it's pretty straightforward and just like you've done before. So here's an example that I created. Now I've done this in a simple manner in order to make it easy to understand. I'm creating something called a list, which is interfaces. This is where I'm going to add the interfaces that I randomly create. I go in a for loop from 0 to 7, and what I do every time through is I'm going to create this thing called interface, which is a dictionary, and then I'm going to append that dictionary to my interfaces list. So what that will do is it is going to take this thing called interfaces. I haven't added it here yet. It's just this thing that I created called interfaces, and I'm going to append it. So at the end of this for loop, I have created all of these interfaces in this data structure called interfaces, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, I want to take device and set the value at the key interfaces equal to the value, the list that I just created. So your next question might be, how do I process nested data? Well, one of the ways to process it is by using nested for loops. Here you can see I'm going through and iterating through all of the items in my device. So OS and name and IP, etc. I'm going to go through that. Remember, I have to do .items if I'm going through a dictionary, if I want to iterate through it. And then I come down here and I say, if the key is not interfaces, okay, I'm just going to print it out like before. But if the key is interfaces, how am I going to process all of those interfaces? Remember, it's a list. Well, pretty simply, I'm just going to go through interface in device sub-interfaces. My key is interfaces. I also could have used value in this situation, but value is a little bit more ambiguous and maybe not as self-explanatory. Here I go through every interface and I'm going to print it out. And if we were to look at the output, you would see the output looks basically like this. If the item in the dictionary was not interfaces, then I just printed it out. If it was interfaces, as it is in this situation, then I went through a loop where I printed out all of the interfaces one at a time. And that is how you go through your nested data structure. Okay, I'm not going to have time to go into all the detail about create networks. Suffice to say, you can look at this. You can look at the long form version of this description of this particular week, but we do a whole lot of stuff. The end result is that we end up with something that looks like this. A lot of different dictionaries of dictionaries of dictionaries of lists of dictionaries, etc., etc. And we end up with this big network data structure. So look at that if you choose to do so. But what we're going to talk about here is, what if I want to just refer to one item? And down here I actually do this description of assignment versus copy versus deep copy. Refer to the long form versions. This is something that's important if you're intermediate or advanced. If you're new, you don't have to worry about this right now. But look at how I'm referring to an item. I have my square brackets here, and I'm referring to the particular key of subnets. And then within that dictionary, I'm referring, there must be another dictionary because here's another key. And then within that, there's another dictionary. So here's this. I'm down at the devices level of my nested data structure. Now, this is probably a good clue. I can look at this and say, well, I'll bet you that's a list. And sure enough, it will be a list. And then what are the items in the list? Well, it's a dictionary. And the dictionary has an item in it called name. This is where I'm down at my device. And if you were to look at the output, then that would follow what we see here. Subnets, then the subnet address, and then devices, and then within devices it's going to be a list. Within this list, every single one of these is going to be a dictionary, and the dictionary will have IP, name, OS, etc. And at certain points you will get to the interfaces for the dictionary, and that itself is going to be a list, and every interface itself is going to be a dictionary. So once you get over the stigma and the fear of this, it's really pretty straightforward what you do, but this is nested data in all of its glory. Okay, so really quick, what did we learn? Well, we learned about nested data structures. It's basically having a data structure like a list within another, like a dictionary, or even having dictionaries within lists, etc. And if you take it to the extreme, then you can have something as nested as this, where I have many dictionaries, inside dictionaries, inside dictionaries, inside lists. What does it look like in the code? Well, it looks like it does everywhere else. You just declare the data here. In my situation, I can create a list and then assign it. That was a simple situation. We looked at briefly creating a network, which created all of that super nested data. Oh, by the way, I went through how do you process it? Well, you process it with for loops inside for loops quite often, and so that's one of the ways to do it. And how can you reference specific items? Well, here's an example of referencing a specific item. Look at all of those keys. You go to the next data structure, which again, there's a dictionary with a key, another one with a key. This one happens to be a list, so it's a list with an index of 0. and then now you're down at a device, and the device has a key called a name. That's what we talked about. Hopefully it makes sense. If not, let me know, and thanks for listening.